He's your brother. It's your duty. That was the sentence my mother screamed loud enough to rattle the windows. My name is Olivia. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Because the moment they tried to make his failure my burden, they didn't realize I'd already locked every dollar in a vault they couldn't break. It was supposed to be a family meeting. That's what the group text said. But we all knew what it really was, an ambush. The moment I walked into my parents' living room and saw the thick envelope on the coffee table, I knew. They weren't there to talk. They were there to take. My father was sitting stiffly in his recliner, arms crossed. My mother was pacing like a lawyer about to deliver closing arguments. And my brother, Jason? Jason was slouched on the couch with his legs wide and arms folded, like a teenager sent to detention. Except he was 33, jobless, and apparently $47,000 in debt. Credit cards, gambling, some crypto scam. The details were blurry. The excuses, endless. What wasn't blurry was the demand. "You're doing well," Dad said, his voice flat, like he was reading a grocery list. "You have your own company. You can handle this." I tilted my head. Handle what exactly? "The debt," Mom snapped. "The collectors are circling. They're threatening legal action. He could lose everything. You're his sister." I blinked. And Mom's eyes widened like I'd cursed in church. "And, Olivia, we raised you better than this. You don't turn your back on family. Especially not your brother. You wouldn't even have your business if we hadn't supported you through college." "Supported?" I said, trying not to laugh. "I worked 3 jobs through college. Jason borrowed money from me while I was in finals week." "That was years ago," she said quickly, dismissively, like truth expired after a few birthdays. Jason hadn't said a word. Not one. Just stared at the wall like this wasn't even about him. They kept going. "This is what families do. You're the oldest. You lead by example. If we don't fix this, it ruins our name." Every guilt tactic. Every manipulation. Like a greatest hits album of toxic parenting. But I let them rant. Because what they didn't know, what they would never know, is that 3 months ago I met with my financial advisor. I moved every asset, every savings account, every property deed into an irrevocable trust. Not in my name. Not accessible to anyone. And guess who's not on the list of beneficiaries? Anyone with my blood. I watched them yell. Watched their faces twist in self-righteous fury. My mother even pointed at me like I was the one who had failed them. "She has no heart," she said to my father. "Her brother could go to jail, and she's sitting there like she's watching a movie."
"No, Mom."
I wasn't watching a movie. I was watching the final scene of a performance I'd been cast in my whole life. And, tonight, I decided to walk off set. They thought I'd cave. That I'd pull out my checkbook like always. But all I did was lean back and smile. Because the vault was sealed. And this time the key belonged to me. Jason has always failed upward. If you asked my parents, they'd say he was just finding his path. But from where I stood, it looked more like everyone else paving the road beneath his feet while he coasted barefoot through life. When we were kids, I learned early. If Jason cried, someone got blamed, and that someone was usually me. He broke Dad's antique watch when we were 8. I got grounded because I should have been watching him. He stole $40 from Mom's wallet in middle school. I got the lecture about trust and disappointment, while Jason played video games in the next room. By the time we were teenagers, the roles were locked in. I worked at the library after school. Jason threw parties in our basement while my parents were out of town. When I came home one night to find the living room trashed and 3 strangers asleep on our floor, I thought, surely this time, they'll do something. They did. They made me clean it up so the neighbors wouldn't talk. I remember standing in that room, holding an empty bottle and wondering if anyone in this family saw me as anything other than a built-in cleanup crew. It didn't stop there. He failed out of his first year of college. Mom cried for days. Dad yelled at me for not encouraging him enough. I got into business school on scholarship. Jason started selling sneakers online and called himself an entrepreneur. When it failed, I paid his phone bill so he wouldn't lose his apartment. I remember the exact amount, $378.42. I remember it because I had to choose between that and my groceries that week. When I told my mom, her reply was, "You're stronger. He's still figuring things out." That's when it hit me. They didn't just excuse his failure, they expected me to fund it. When I finally started my business, a real one, built from scratch with blood and bone and no handouts, guess who my parents introduced at a family wedding as the visionary of the family? Jason. Because he had ideas. Ideas that never made money. Never lasted more than 6 months. Ideas that landed him in $47,000 of debt and now had me sitting in their living room being told I had to do what's right. Right? What was right about spending my life cleaning up his disasters while they cheered him on for surviving the fires he set? What was right about rewarding someone who had never lifted a finger while the one who kept the roof from collapsing got handed a mop? There was no right. There was just a system, one built around Jason being the golden child, no matter how tarnished he became. And I was the scaffolding, the unthanked support beam, the one expected to stand still while the weight of everyone else's failure pressed down harder each year. But something had cracked, and this time, I wouldn't be the one paying to fix it. I used to think love looked like sacrifice, like staying quiet when you're disrespected, like giving what you don't have because someone else claims to need it more, like shrinking yourself to make room for people who were never going to move over anyway. But that was before I opened a spreadsheet at 2 a.m. and realized something terrifying. In 10 years, I had given over $38,000 to my family, and not $1 had ever been paid back. Rent, utilities, emergencies, credit card bailouts, car repairs, fines, groceries. The list went on like a trail of breadcrumbs, except there was no home at the end of it. Just a bottomless pit called, "But you're doing well, right?" That night, I stare at that spreadsheet with my heart pounding. It wasn't just the number. It was the silence around it. No thank yous. No repayment plans. No birthday cards. No effort. They didn't love me. They loved what I could give. The realization made me physically sick. It wasn't just Jason. It was my parents, too. The way they'd look the other way when he failed and clap when I paid. The way my mother once told me, "You should be grateful you're in a position to help." As if my hard-earned security was a community asset. As if my boundaries were a betrayal. But I was done treating my success like a family donation box. So I called a financial advisor. A good one. His name was Marcus. Older, calm, didn't flinch when I told him what I wanted. "I want to build a structure," I said, "that no one but me can access." He nodded. "Irrevocable trust?" Exactly. Over the next few weeks, we moved everything. My savings, my business revenue accounts, my properties, my emergency fund, all transferred into a protected legal trust structured under my business name, with airtight clauses and beneficiary locks. No cosigners, no relatives, no loopholes. And then I went further. I changed the passwords to my personal accounts. I removed my parents as my emergency contacts. I updated my power of attorney. I rewrote my will. It wasn't bitterness. It was liberation. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was protecting myself. I kept it quiet, clean, professional. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain. Because people like Jason don't need explanations. They just need you to stay available. So I stopped being available. I built something stronger than walls. I built limits. That's what no one tells you. The real legacy isn't money. It's boundaries. It's teaching yourself to say no and meaning it. So when that family meeting happened, the yelling, the guilt, the pleas to rescue their golden boy again, I sat there knowing every account was locked, every asset sealed, every escape route closed. They thought I was sitting on a pile of gold waiting to be guilt into giving. But all they saw was the outer vault. The real wealth was already untouchable, and they would never see it again. The living room felt like a courtroom, and I was the one on trial. My parents sat across from me like a prosecution team, both armed with folders, statements, and rehearsed lines. Jason sat to the side, head bowed, looking bored, or maybe just detached. He hadn't said a word since I walked in. My mother took the lead. She always did. If you don't help him, she said, they're going to start garnishing wages. They'll come after his car, his credit, his dignity. I raised an eyebrow. Whose fault is that? My father jumped in, his voice heavier than usual. He made mistakes, yes. But he's your brother. He needs support, not judgment. I didn't answer. My silence made them angrier. And when people lose control, they get louder. You have the money, Mom snapped. We've seen your business. You just posted about a new contract. You paid for that trip to Italy last year, didn't you? I looked her dead in the eye. That trip was for a business deal I landed after working 80-hour weeks. You want a souvenir? Dad slammed the folder on the coffee table. It slid across the polished wood like a final verdict. Enough games, Olivia. This is your family. You're the only one who can help. I opened the folder slowly. It was a bank statement. Jason's. Overdrawn by thousands. Red numbers everywhere. Gambling charges. Transfers to crypto apps. A loan with 36% interest. And the total owed, $47,133.89. They expected me to pay it. To cover the sins, clean the stain, reset the board so Jason could mess it up again in 6 months. I looked at Jason. Still quiet. Still refusing to meet my eyes. I finally spoke. Jason, do you have anything to say? He shrugged. They told me you'd fix it. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. He was always the child. Even now, a grown man waiting for someone else to fix his mess. I stood. For the first time in that room, I stood while they sat. No, I said. My mom's jaw dropped. No. No, I repeated. I'm not paying. I'm not saving. I'm not enabling. This ends now. You're just going to let him fall? My dad growled. I nodded. Yes. Because he's never learned what it feels like to stand. Mom reached for my arm. You don't mean this. We're your family. I stepped back. Family doesn't mean unlimited access to someone's life, time, and money. Family should mean respect. And you lost mine the moment you made my success a punishment. They kept talking, accusing, guilt-tripping. But I was already at the door. I turned one last time. The Olivia you could guilt into saving him doesn't exist anymore. Then I walked out. No drama. No door slam. Just a soft click behind me, and the sound of a system collapsing under its own weight. At first, the silence was loud. No calls. No texts. No, you'll regret this voicemails. Just nothing. I thought maybe they were regrouping, planning their next guilt campaign. But what I didn't realize was that my silence had done something unexpected. It forced them to sit with their own noise. 3 days after the meeting, I got the first call blocked number. I didn't answer. Then came the emails. First from Mom. Then Dad. Then even Jason. Subject lines like, please reconsider. We can fix this. You're tearing the family apart. I deleted them all without opening a single one. They tried one last power move showing up at my office. I didn't even buzz them in. I watched them from the security camera and went right back to reviewing my quarterly reports. That's when the messages turned nasty. Mom left a voicemail. Don't forget who raised you. Who gave you everything. Everything? You mean the house where I raised myself while you praised your son for waking up before noon? You mean the school years where I packed my own lunches while Jason got a new video game every report card? But I didn't respond. I didn't post online. I didn't vent to friends. I just watched. And as I watched, the house began to fall. Jason made a dramatic post online, a photo of an eviction notice taped to his door, with the caption, "Family only loves you when you're useful." It got a few likes, a handful of comments from his enablers, but the tide was shifting. One person replied, "You're 33. Maybe stop depending on your sister." Another, "Didn't she pay for your last car?" Then silence again. 2 weeks later, I heard from a cousin, one of the few I still talk to. "Hey," she said gently. Just thought you should know your parents are trying to sell the house. What? I asked, though I already knew why. Apparently, the bank's pressuring them. They co-signed something for Jason a while back and he defaulted. The house, the one they guarded like a trophy, the one I wasn't allowed to bring friends to because appearances matter, was slipping away. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. But I did feel a shift. Not because they were losing, but because for once, I wasn't. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the emergency contact. I wasn't the bailout fund. I wasn't the sponge they squeezed when things got tight. They were living inside a machine they built, and I had removed the engine.
And Jason?
The golden boy. Now just a man alone in a mess of his own making. No spotlight, no sympathy, no sister to sweep the floor behind him. I thought they'd stop. I thought once the house was on the market and the debt collectors came knocking, they'd finally get it, that I wasn't coming to save them this time. I underestimated how deep entitlement can rot. One morning, I opened my inbox to a message from a journalist I'd spoken to during a business conference. Casual contact. Nothing serious. Subject line. Heads up, someone's trying to dig. Inside was a screenshot, Jason's name, linked to a burner email, asking for information about my company. He was trying to sell a story. The message read, "She's not who she pretends to be. Ask around. She's not as clean as she looks. I have receipts." Receipts? I hadn't spoken to Jason in weeks. The only receipts he had were the Venmo logs of the money I sent him to keep the lights on. I sat there staring at the screen, my tea cooling in my hand. There it was, the last desperate attempt to flip the narrative. If guilt didn't work, if silence didn't work, if public shame didn't work, maybe a smear campaign would. And that's when I knew what I had to do. Not retaliate. Just reveal. I spent that night organizing everything. Not for the media, not for revenge, but for clarity. I gathered the bank transfers. Screenshots of his begging texts. The late-night calls. The thank yous. The "you're my only hope" messages. Even the one where he said, "I wish mom and dad were more like you." I crafted a public statement. It was short, measured. Not angry, just honest. I've spent over a decade helping my family behind the scenes. I never spoke on it publicly because I believed dignity meant handling things privately. But when that privacy is weaponized against you, silence becomes permission. I have nothing to hide. I'm proud of the work I've done, professionally and personally. And I will never apologize for protecting my peace or my boundaries. I attached no files. No screenshots. I didn't have to, because the truth has a sound, and when it's spoken calmly, it echoes louder than a scream. The post went viral. Messages poured in. Not pity, respect. People shared their own stories. Daughters expected to act like parents. Siblings turned into personal banks. Children burdened with debts that weren't theirs. The tide turned fast. Jason's attempt to sabotage me backfired spectacularly. Sponsors that had once followed him quietly unfollowed. A small podcast he'd been trying to launch? Cancelled. Comment shut down. Reputation cracked. My phone didn't ring. No apologies. Just silence. But this silence wasn't manipulative. It was surrender. The kind that happens when people finally see that their games no longer work. And me? I wasn't angry anymore. Because truth, when finally spoken, does something beautiful. It unlocks the part of you that no longer needs validation. And once that part wakes up, you never shrink again. Peace didn't arrive like a firework. It came like a slow tide, soft, steady, and full of clarity. I moved out of the city. Found a place on the edge of a hill, where the sunrise kissed my windows before my alarm ever had the chance. My mornings became mine again. No buzzing phones. No emergencies disguised as family. Just coffee, emails, and the sound of my breath finally slowing down. I built back quietly. My business grew, not because of pity but because I now had energy for the right things. Clients who respected my time. Teams who valued leadership over sacrifice. I didn't overshare. I didn't overextend. I just delivered excellence, with boundaries in place. And then I started something new. A mentorship program for young women in finance. Not flashy, just real. I taught them what no one taught me. That financial success means nothing without emotional protection. That giving without limits isn't noble, it's destructive. And that love without respect is just manipulation dressed up in tradition. I watched them bloom faster than I ever had, because they had tools. And they had me, someone who had walked through the fire and come out holding the blueprint. One afternoon, as I was reviewing grant applications for the mentorship program, my assistant walked in holding a plain, white envelope. "No return address," she said. I recognized the handwriting before I even touched it.
Mom's.
It was short.
Neat.
Almost too neat, like she had rewritten it 5 times before sealing it. "Olivia, we were wrong. We've been wrong for years. I didn't see it. I didn't want to. You've always carried too much, and we taught you that was love. But it wasn't. It was dependence. Maybe even fear. I don't know if you'll forgive us. But I do hope you're happy, Mom." I read it twice. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt a quiet release. She hadn't asked for money. She hadn't tried to explain away her behavior. For the first time in my life, she was just honest. And I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I didn't need to answer everything anymore. Sometimes peace isn't a conversation. Sometimes it's knowing you could say something and choosing stillness instead. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer next to the contract for my new home, and got back to work. Because now I don't chase closure. I build futures. And my future? It doesn't carry anyone else's mistakes. Just the lessons and the strength that came from surviving them. The room buzzed with quiet elegance. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Tables were dressed in ivory linen and silver accents. A catered lunch waited behind the curtain. And in the center of it all stood a podium with my name on the welcome banner. Olivia Patterson, Wealth and Wellness Summit. I never thought my story would end on a stage. I never wanted a spotlight. But when you spend most of your life being erased, sometimes the best revenge is simply being seen on your terms. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about something bigger, legacy. Not the kind they tried to burden me with, not Jason's mess, or my parents' shame, or the guilt they gift-wrapped and handed to me every year like a birthday card. This was legacy as I defined it, building a space where boundaries were honored, where wealth wasn't handed out to fix mistakes, but created to build futures, where young women, especially those like me, could learn the truth early. You owe no one your ruin, not even your family. After the event ended, a young woman came up to me. She couldn't have been more than 24. She looked nervous. Inspired. Maybe both. She said, "How did you learn to protect yourself like this?" I smiled, and I told her the truth. By surviving the people who believed they were entitled to me. Her eyes widened, but she nodded. She understood. There's a certain silence in people like us, those who've carried the weight of entire households before learning we had permission to put it down. We don't speak loud, but we build loud. My trust still exists. It's grown now. It holds not just my finances, but my future, my business, my mentorship program, my safety net. It's structured so tightly, not even a court order could pry it open. And no, I didn't list my parents or Jason as beneficiaries. Not out of hate, but out of survival. Because trust is more than paperwork. It's knowing who can sit at your table and who only comes hungry. Months passed. One day, I drove past my childhood home. It had a new coat of paint. A new family lived there. 2 little kids were running through the sprinkler in the front yard. I didn't feel bitter. I felt nothing. That house was no longer mine to grieve. And as for Jason, I don't know where he ended up. Last I heard, he was working part-time somewhere, couch surfing with a friend from high school. He still hasn't called. And I hope he never does. Because I am no longer his emergency contact. No longer his bailout plan. No longer a name on any list that ends in obligation. He had a sister once. One who gave, and gave, and gave, until she finally learned to lock the vault. They told me it was my duty to clean up his mess. But I made a different choice, to clean up the part of me that thought I owed them anything. They reached for the vault, but I had already changed the locks.